This is the one. This girl is the rightful daughter-in-law of our house. Bypassing the famously beautiful older sisters, the father-in-law chose the youngest daughter, a girl with prominent buck teeth and a face scattered with freckles. What could the most powerful merchant in the realm possibly have seen in this plain girl to choose her as the heir's bride? Though the village gossips mocked her, behind her humble appearance lay a wondrous secret that would one day turn the tides of the guild's fate. To ensure the storyteller's tales continue, lend us your cheer and let us begin today's heartwarming tale of old. Once upon a time, just past the thawing of winter on a late spring day, the manor hall of Lord Thomas was filled with the heavy, sweet scent of imported rose powder. The eldest daughter, Eleanor, and the second daughter, Isabella, were giddily preparing for the village's grand spring fair. The two sisters were renowned throughout the parish as beauties of unmatched grace. Eleanor possessed the elegant, radiant face of a blooming spring rose, while Isabella boasted cheeks like ripe peaches and lips as red as summer cherries. Whenever the young men of the village caught sight of the sisters, they would stare so blankly that they often tripped over stone walls. Suitors from far and wide sent matchmakers to Lord Thomas's estate, leaving the dirt road to the manor constantly rutted with cart tracks. Before the looking-glass, the two sisters preened and giggled. "Eleanor, if we wear our finest linen gowns today, we shall look like a painting. The village lads won't be able to look away." Meanwhile, out in the muddy courtyard, the youngest daughter, Beatrice, had her woolen sleeves rolled up. She was vigorously scrubbing heavy wooden barrels and tending to the pungent winter cheese and curing salted hams that had been hanging in the smokehouse since the first frost. A sharp, earthy odor filled the yard. The older sisters pinched their noses and scoffed at Beatrice. "Oh, the stench! Beatrice, we are off to see the spring flowers. You just stay here and play with your rotting curds." "It suits you perfectly." Beatrice had prominent buck teeth that kept her lips from fully closing, giving her the appearance of a perpetual, gentle smile. Though her face was covered in freckles, her eyes were as clear and bright as the morning star. Lord Thomas stepped out into the courtyard and looked at Beatrice with a heart full of pity. He turned his stern gaze toward the older sisters and scolded them. "You two do nothing to help your sister with her hard labor, and yet you only care for your vanity." Then he walked over and gently wiped the dirt from Beatrice's hands. "Beatrice, my sweet girl, wash up and go to the spring fair with your sisters." Beatrice smiled brightly, gently patting the white bloom of mold on the rind, the curing cheese as if it were precious silk. "I am quite all right, Father. The flowers on the hill will wither and fall in a few days' time. But this bloom of mold on our winter stores will keep our family's bellies full. Throughout the year, I find these stores much more beautiful." Lord Thomas's heart ached. He knew his youngest daughter possessed a deep and beautiful soul, but he constantly worried that the cruel world would only judge her plain face and break her spirit. Beatrice happily returned to her work, inspecting the barrels in the sun. To her eyes, The white mold on the provisions looked like soft, fluffy clouds. The sound of the heavy cheese wheels being turned in the salt brine echoed like fish splashing in a lively brook. Ah, it is curing perfectly, she murmured to herself with a warm smile. This winter's fare will taste as sweet as honey. A few days later, a great commotion swept through Lord Thomas's estate. Word arrived that Master William, the wealthiest and most formidable merchant, guild master in the realm, was coming to the manor to seek a potential bride for his heir. Lord Thomas called for Beatrice with a tense expression. "Beatrice, stay in the bakehouse today and tend to the hearth. Your sisters will entertain our guest." Lord Thomas had a hidden motive. He believed that a proud, high-ranking man like Master William would never look past Beatrice's appearance to see her true worth. He simply wanted to protect his youngest daughter from unnecessary heartache and scorn. Soon, Master William, the head of the great merchant guild, arrived at the estate. He was an imposing elder with eyebrows like a fierce wolf and a sharp, penetrating gaze. However, cold sweat was pouring down his forehead like rain. The unpredictable spring weather had deceived him. He had walked a great distance, wearing a heavy woolen cloak and thick furs, leaving him utterly exhausted and drained of his vitality. Lord Thomas quickly presented Eleanor and Isabella to the esteemed guest. Eager to impress the wealthy guildmaster, the two beautiful sisters rushed to the kitchen and brought out the finest drinks they could prepare. "My lord, drink this sweet mead enriched with honey. It will restore your vigor," one said. "I have brought ice-cold spring water to cool your humors, my lord," said the other. Master William furrowed his brow as he looked at the overly sweet mead and the freezing water. To offer such rich sweetness, an icy chill, to a man suffering from severe exhaustion and dehydration showed a complete lack of understanding. They are beautiful on the outside, but their minds are empty, he thought bitterly. These vain girls are not fit to be the mistresses of my guild. Just then, Beatrice emerged from the bakehouse. The moment she caught the scent of Master William's cold sweat, her keen senses detected a gray, fading energy about him. She immediately recognized the signs of severe depletion and hunger. Instead of cold water or rich honey, Beatrice carefully brought forth a wooden spoon, a cup of warm barley water mixed with a pinch of sea salt. "My lord, please try this," she said softly. Master William took a sip of the warm broth. As the savory, slightly salty liquid flowed into his stomach, a sudden surge of life returned to his weary bones. His clouded mind cleared instantly. "This child has saved my life," he realized. He looked at her in astonishment. "How did you know that my body was crying out?" "For salt?" Beatrice offered her gentle, buck-toothed smile. "My lord, the scent of your sweat lacked its usual heavy musk and smelled thin, like plain water. I sensed that the vital salts had been drained from your body. So I added a pinch of sea salt to the warm barley." Master William was deeply moved by the profound observation and care hidden in that simple cup of broth. Looking at Beatrice's rough, hard-working hands and her intelligent, unwavering eyes, he made his decision. "This is the one, This girl is my rightful daughter-in-law." Instead of rejoicing, Lord Thomas jumped up in alarm and blocked Master William's path. "My lord, my daughter is the most precious treasure of my heart. Do you intend to take her just to use her as a scullery maid in your great house?" "I will not let her go, not until the dirt covers my grave." Master William's expression turned solemn and respectful. "To my eyes as well, she is a flawless diamond hidden in the rough earth. I swear I shall treat her with the utmost honor. Please grant me your blessing." Seeing the absolute sincerity in the merchant's eyes, Lord Thomas finally let his tears fall. He looked at Beatrice, his heart torn between profound gratitude that someone finally saw her true worth and the sorrow of a father giving away his beloved child. With a trembling voice, Lord Thomas said, "Do not ever forget that vow, my lord." When the news spread that Master William had chosen Beatrice as his heir's bride, both households were turned upside down. Eleanor and Isabella stamped their feet in furious disbelief. That plain, ugly girl was chosen? The old man must have gone mad to choose that buck-toothed creature over us. There is no justice in this world. Beatrice merely looked down at her own hands in bewilderment. Me? But I only offered him a cup of salted broth. Meanwhile, chaos erupted at the Merchant Guild's estate. Edward, Master William's scholarly son, knelt before his father and pleaded. "Father, I understand you act for the good of the guild. But I am a man of letters, not a merchant. The wife I need is a refined lady, with whom I can discuss poetry, theology, and the Latin texts. That woman is not my match." Master William looked down at his son. In the old man's eyes lay the heavy weariness of a patriarch and a deep, abiding pity for his son's naivete. "Edward, I have spent my entire life reading the true nature of men. Trust my eyes this one time." Master William's voice dropped to a low, firm whisper. "That girl is like a sturdy oak tree, with its roots firmly planted deep in the earth. While you are busy reading your books, she will read the world and protect you." Hearing the desperate, protective love in his aging father's voice, Edward felt his resistance crumble. Though he was deeply disappointed by the prospect of such a bride, he realized this might be his elderly father's final, most earnest wish. Edward bowed his head. "I will follow your will, father." Master William patted his son's shoulder, breathing a long sigh of relief. He firmly believed that while pretty spring flowers wither in a fortnight, strong roots survive the harshest winters to bloom again. The day of the wedding dawned. A massive crowd of villagers and nobles gathered. At the cold stone church, swarming like clouds, the murmurs of the guests swelled like a restless ocean. Dressed in lavish gowns, Eleanor and Isabella could be seen hiding their snickers behind their silk fans. To Beatrice, the mocking whispers of the crowd sounded like the sharp, agonizing screech of shattering glass. A wave of dizziness washed over her, but she bit her lip and endured it. Such a hideous thing, becoming the young mistress of the Merchant Guild. Master William must have truly lost his sight. The moment arrived for the bride and groom to exchange their vows and share the bridal chalice of wine. Standing close to her, Edward looked down and saw Beatrice's prominent teeth and freckle-covered face. He sharply inhaled, momentarily stunned. For the romantic, scholarly Edward, reality felt terribly cruel. His eyes wavered in clear panic. Noticing the groom's hesitation, the wedding guests began to whisper even louder. "Oh my, the poor young master looks ready to faint. He'll draw blood if he tries to kiss those teeth." Beatrice's face burned with intense shame. The hands holding the silver chalice trembled like leaves in a storm. The red wine sloshed precariously, on the verge of spilling over her gown. It was then that Edward moved. He reached out and wrapped his wide woolen sleeve over Beatrice's shaking hands, steadying the chalice. Edward slowly turned his head and swept his gaze across the mocking crowd. His eyes were cold, dignified, and commanding. The sheer weight of his noble presence instantly silenced the murmuring church. Leaning in, Edward spoke in a low, gentle voice meant only for Beatrice's ears. "My lady, even if the wine spills, you may raise your head. We are husband and wife." Beatrice lifted her gaze to look at Edward. In his eyes, she still saw traces of his initial shock, but beneath it lay a solid, unshakable resolve. With Edward's steadying hand, she safely drank from the chalice. Beneath the sharp scent of the bitter wine, Beatrice caught the faint, grounding scent of Edward, a scent like a strong, dependable tree. Though it was not yet love, it was the moment, a seed of mutual compassion, and loyalty was planted. That night, the thick beeswax candle in the bridal chamber was slowly burning down. Edward sat with his back turned to Beatrice, deeply engrossed in a heavy tome of philosophy. "I must continue my studies, so please, my lady, go to sleep first," he said stiffly. But the sound of Edward's reading was not smooth. It was choked and fragmented. The rustle of parchment as he turned the same page back and forth dozens of times was rough and anxious. Beatrice sat quietly on the edge of the woven blanket, focusing on the sounds and scents coming from her new husband's back. To her keen ears, the sound of his reading was like someone grinding dry, coarse sand between their teeth. Furthermore, the air in the room carried not only the smell of the burning candle wick, but also a bitter, parched scent radiating from Edward himself. It was the scent of extreme tension and profound anxiety. Beatrice carefully broke the silence. "My lord, the sound of your reading catches in your throat, much like the ragged breathing of a man suffering from severe indigestion. If you force yourself to swallow it, you will only make yourself ill." Edward turned around in surprise. "Do you know how to read the Latin texts, my lady?" Beatrice shook her head. "I do not know the letters, my lord, but I know the way of things. If the path within your book is blocked, it is perfectly fine to rest for a while." Her voice flowed with a warm, soothing rhythm. Just as bread needs time to rise before it is baked, the mind needs rest to truly savor the fruits of study. Let us end the reading for tonight. The sun will rise again tomorrow. Caught in his own insecurities, Edward's face flushed red. But his wife's gentle metaphor offered him an unexpected, profound comfort. Without another word, Edward closed the heavy tome and blew out the candle. In the darkness of the chamber, his quiet voice echoed softly, "Thank you." It was the night of their first true connection. 3 days after the wedding, a new trial began. Lady Margaret, Edward's mother and the strict mistress of the merchant house, summoned Beatrice. Having lived her entire life overshadowed by the imposing presence of her husband, Master William, Lady Margaret was a fiercely proud and ambitious woman whose sole joy was her son, Edward. Seeing her husband so fiercely protective of this plain, low-born daughter-in-law had severely twisted her pride. Determined to break the new bride's spirit, Lady Margaret refused to hand over the iron keys to the manor's pantry. Instead, she threw a basket into the kitchen containing nothing but shriveled, moldy root vegetables and bitter, wilted greens. "Let us see this wondrous skill of yours," Lady Margaret sneered. "And if you dare blame the ingredients, I shall have you thrown out into the muddy streets." Standing in the cold kitchen, Beatrice calmly breathed in the sharp, sour stench rising from the spoiled roots. But Beatrice did not panic. She used barley water to draw out the foulness of the rot, then roasted the roots with rich rendered beef tallow and wild herbs to mask the stench and bring out a hearty, earthy flavor. Furthermore, she knew that Lady Margaret suffered from severe stomach ailments, her insides constantly tied in painful knots. With great care, Beatrice brewed a clear, soothing broth of wild turnips and mint to ease her mother-in-law's digestion. When the wooden trenchers were brought into the dining hall, Edward took one look and put down his horn spoon. What use is a scholar of the parish filling his belly when he has failed his studies? He lamented, his voice bitter with self-pity over his recent failures in his academic pursuits. It was then that Beatrice spoke, her voice quiet but unyielding. "My Lord Edward, do you not hear the cries of these roots?" They survived the freezing winter mud, the heavy rains, and the scorching summer sun, enduring until the very end. This meal is not mere sustenance. It is a remedy, forged from endurance. Eat of it, and find the strength to weather your own storms. Edward realized that a humble root had lived more fiercely than he ever had. Ashamed, he picked up his spoon and tasted the turnip broth. He was instantly amazed by the exquisite, comforting flavor. Meanwhile, Lady Margaret, eager to find fault, took a sip of the broth. To her absolute shock, the heavy, painful knot in her stomach melted away into a soothing warmth. She glared at her new daughter-in-law. Yet she completely emptied her wooden bowl. A few days later, Master William summoned Beatrice privately. "Child, I am placing you in charge of the guild's great cellar and the courtyard of heavy oak casks," he declared. The merchant guild's estate held dozens of massive wooden barrels and iron-bound casks filled with salted meats, smoked fish, and imported aged wine. However, due to recent neglect, rumors had spread through the medieval village that their famous the goods were losing their quality. Edward looked deeply worried. How can the wife of a gentleman's scholar soil her hands with such grueling labor? He asked. But Beatrice replied cheerfully, "The estate thrives only when its provisions are sound. Leave it to me." Every day, Beatrice went down to the courtyard, opening the heavy wooden lids of the casks to check the brine, ensuring the conditions were perfect, and watching carefully for any foul mold. Then, a few days later, an uproar broke out in the guild. Customers who had bought their prized aged wine and salted preserves began returning them to the manor. They complained loudly. "What kind of swill is this? It is so bitter it cannot be swallowed." Beatrice rushed to the courtyard casks. To her ears alone, a sharp, unnatural cry seemed to rise from the barrels. She dipped a finger into the brine and tasted it. Instantly, a bitter venom, like the bite of an adder, struck her tongue. Beatrice spoke with absolute certainty. This did not spoil by nature's hand. Someone has secretly poured the juice of nightshade and bitter hemlock into our casks. She could sense the dark, malicious energy of the poisonous weeds. Master William's face turned red with fury. Who would dare tamper with the livelihood of our guild? Beatrice replied quietly, "If we are to catch the culprit, we must lie in wait under the cover of darkness." Edward leaped to his feet. "It is far too dangerous. I shall stand watch with you." Beatrice shook her head. But Edward refused to back down, determined that he would not let his wife face danger alone. The following afternoon, Beatrice worked tirelessly in the courtyard beneath the blazing sun. Sweat poured down her face as she painstakingly cleaned the massive oak casks. One by one, scooping out the ruined brine and replacing it with fresh spring, water, and coarse salt. It was back-breaking labor. From the window of his study, Edward watched his wife toil. His heart ached at the sight, but he felt too shy to approach her directly. Instead, he called over a passing manor servant. "Take this clay jug of cool well water to the young mistress. Tell her I fear she will collapse, and she must drink." The servant brought the water to the courtyard. "Milady, the young master insists you drink this." Beatrice took the jug and drank. As the cool water soothed her parched throat, a warm smile graced her lips. Her husband's quiet affection tasted sweeter than the purest spring water. Night fell over the estate. Beatrice hid in the deep shadows near the great casks, waiting. Soon, Edward appeared, carrying a heavy wool cloak. "Beatrice, I cannot leave you alone in the dark." "I will guard you," he whispered. Beatrice shook her head gently. "My Lord Edward, you should be at your desk, reading your parchments." But Edward spoke with firm resolve. "You are far more precious to me than any parchment." He draped the thick wool cloak over her shoulders and sat beside her, his body heat warding off the bitter chill of the night. In the darkest hour, just before dawn, a strange scent drifted to Beatrice's nose. It was the heavy, expensive scent of foreign musk. Beatrice pinched Edward's arm as a silent signal. From the shadows, a figure crept into the courtyard, clutching a small glass vial. Just as the figure reached for the lid of a cask, Edward leaped up and shouted, "Who goes there?" Startled, the figure dropped the vial and tried to flee into the muddy alley. Edward lunged forward and tackled the intruder to the cobblestones.
"You scoundrel! Are you the one poisoning our guild's provisions?"
When the manor guards arrived with torches, the flickering light revealed the face of John, the loyal lackey of Richard, the corrupt guild steward. The shattered vial on the ground reeked of bitter hemlock. Beatrice spoke coldly. "We must take this man to Master William at once." Though they had caught the culprit, her heart was heavy. Knowing a traitor lurked within their own ranks, they dragged John into the great hall. Master William roared, "Who put you up to this? Speak!" But John kept his mouth tightly shut, refusing to say a word. Richard had clearly warned him to stay silent. With no proof tying him to the crime, Richard smoothly distanced himself from his lackey, leaving Master William with no choice but to banish John from the estate. Master William took Beatrice's hands. "You have done well, child. Had it not been for you, our guild would have been ruined." Edward looked at his wife with profound awe. Her courage and sharp instincts to stay awake all night and catch the villain were things no parish scholar could. Ever learn from reading old manuscripts? Beatrice possessed a profound, living wisdom. However, their relief was short-lived. A few days later, a far greater crisis struck the Merchant Guild. Due to the poisoned casks, the sale of their provisions halted completely, pushing the guild to the brink of ruin. Master William hastily convened a council of the guild's merchants. Only the guild's final vault of emergency silver coins remained. Richard, the corrupt steward, raised his voice. "Master William, the great summer festival is approaching. We must empty our vaults and buy all the fine velvets and imported silks we can find. It is the only way to make a massive profit and save the guild." The other merchants nodded in agreement, as luxurious fabrics were known to yield the highest silver at the market. Suddenly, from the corner of the hall, Beatrice stepped forward. "No, my lord. If we buy velvet and silk now, the guild will perish. Even if the immediate profit seems small, we must spend every last penny on salt." The hall erupted in murmurs of disbelief. "Salt? How can we recover our fortunes peddling cheap salt? Are you trying to ruin our summer trade?" the merchant sneered. Master William looked at his daughter-in-law intently. "Child, on what grounds do you make such a claim?" "Anticipating a devastating flood." Beatrice looked him straight in the eye and pleaded. "My lord, fine silks and velvets turn to worthless rags when soaked in muddy water. But salt is essential for survival. What we need now is not vanity, but survival. Trust me and buy the salt." Her words struck the very core of Master William's lifelong merchant philosophy. In her steadfast gaze, he saw the fierce, unyielding spirit of his own youth. "Do as my daughter-in-law says. From this day forth, every silver coin goes to purchasing salt." The hall fell into stunned silence once more. For several days, the sun beat down relentlessly on the medieval village, without a single drop of rain. The peasants looked up at the sky in despair, fearing a terrible drought would ruin the manor fields. But inside the guild's massive storehouse, Beatrice's expression was grave. She pressed her hands against the heavy burlap sacks of salt. They felt unusually dense and damp to the touch. The salt was pulling moisture from the air. Looking toward the dark corners of the stone storehouse, she witnessed a chilling sight. A massive swarm of ants, carrying their white eggs in their mandibles, was marching in a thick line up the tall wooden pillars toward the rafters. Beatrice muttered to herself, "The salt weeps, and the smallest creatures flee to high ground. This is proof that the earth is already drowning beneath us. The heavens are about to tear open." Beatrice did not panic or raise a false alarm. Instead, she quietly began her preparations. Deep in the night, while the manor servants slept, Beatrice hauled heavy baskets of black charcoal and bundles of dry straw into the storehouse. She wedged the charcoal and straw between the damp sacks of salt to draw out the ruinous moisture. She worked until she was drenched in sweat, dragging the heavy sacks. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. "Beatrice, why are you toiling in the dead of night?" It was Edward. Realizing his wife was missing, he had come searching for her. Beatrice placed a handful of the damp salt into his palm and explained calmly, "Feel this, my lord. The sky is clear, but the salt is already weeping." She pointed to the wooden pillars. Even the ants flee upward to escape the coming tide. Nature does not lie. Edward was deeply moved by her flawless logic and her tireless dedication. Without another word, he stripped off his fine linen tunic and hoisted a heavy basket of charcoal onto his own back. Side by side, in the dim candlelight, the husband and wife worked in perfect harmony, packing the charcoal and spreading the straw. As the night wore on, the air inside the storehouse grew dry and crisp. At the break of dawn, Edward and Beatrice sat together, looking at their handiwork. "Will the great rains truly come?" Edward asked softly. Beatrice nodded. "Give it but a few days, my lord. The heavens will soon give us their answer." The very next morning, a freezing drop of water landed squarely on Edward's nose. He looked up to see black, bruised clouds swallowing the surrounding hills. Suddenly, the sky split open and a torrential downpour began. It was the beginning of the Great Flood. The rain did not stop. For 3 days and 3 nights, water battered the earth without mercy. The medieval village turned into a nightmare of mud and despair. The thatched cottages in the lower valleys were swallowed by the rising river, and the castle roads became swamps. Within days, the dampness caused stored grains and meats to rot. But worst of all, the region's precious salt supplies dissolved into puddles of muddy water. Panic struck the rival merchant guilds across the land. They opened their storehouses only to find their fortunes of salt melted away. But the guild of Master William was different. When the old merchant unlocked the heavy iron doors of his storehouse, he found his mountain of salt perfectly dry and pristine. Saved by the charcoal and straw Beatrice had painstakingly laid down. "You have saved our house," Master William whispered in awe, tightly grasping Beatrice's hands. Across the kingdom, the price of salt skyrocketed to unimaginable heights. as Master William's guild was the only one left with a surviving supply. Richard's eyes gleamed with unbridled greed as he rushed to Master William. "My lord, this is our golden hour. We must raise the price of salt tenfold." But Beatrice stepped forward and shook her head. "No. True commerce is not about hoarding silver coins. It is about winning the hearts of the people." She spoke with a calm, commanding authority. "Sell the salt for only a few copper pennies more than the usual price. And to every starving commoner who comes to buy, give them an extra measure of our aged meats and smoked fish for free." Richard stomped his boots in a furious rage. "Are you mad? If we give away our goods, what profit is left for us?" But Master William raised his hand, silencing the greedy steward instantly. Master William ordered his men to follow Beatrice's words. Her strategy proved to be a masterstroke. The commoners were deeply moved by the guild's honest pricing and the extra rations of salted meats they were freely given. As the rumors spread, customers flocked to the muddy market square like a flock of birds. Master William's guild is full of true merchants who care for the humble peasants, they whispered, to give us extra food in these dark times. They are our saviors. Every night, by the light of a tallow candle, Edward sat at his heavy oak desk, organizing the parchment ledgers. The profits in silver coins were immense, but what was recorded in the ledgers was not merely wealth. Outside the stone walls, the voices of the commoners could be heard singing praises to the guild. Edward paused his quill and looked out the window at his wife. He saw Beatrice, her buck-toothed smile beaming as she handed out goods to the grateful villagers. In that moment, Edward realized a profound truth. Beatrice possessed a wisdom far greater than the ancient parish scholars he had. Studied in his heavy tomes, she was a living, breathing master of true virtue. As the great rains finally began to cease, leaving a damp and heavy summer air, over the land, two women stood shivering in the rain outside the heavy iron gates of the manor. They were Beatrice's older sisters, Eleanor and Isabella. They wore mold-stained linen gowns, looking utterly wretched and destitute. Eleanor's husband had ignored Beatrice's warning of the great flood. He had spent all his silver coins hoarding fine silks and delicate parchment, goods terribly vulnerable to the damp. When the flood waters breached his storehouses, everything turned into a rotting, useless pulp. And the ruthless debt collectors had seized his manor estate. Isabella's husband, a man addicted to tavern wagers, could not handle the mounting debts during the chaos and had fled into the night like a coward. It was a miserable end for couples who had valued only vain appearances and empty nobility. Beatrice walked out through the heavy gates. "Beatrice, please give us a place to sleep, just for one night." Eleanor's voice trembled. Without a word, Beatrice led her sisters into the warmth of the manor hall. Edward clicked his tongue when he saw his sisters-in-law. "They reap what they have sown," he muttered. But Beatrice set a warm table of barley bread, roasted meats, and hot soup before her sisters. "People must live," she said softly. "Whether I resent them or not, we share the same blood." Eleanor and Isabella wept as they ate the hearty meal. It was the first warm food they had tasted in many days. Edward felt a deep surge of respect for his wife's vast, forgiving heart, taking in the very women who had once mocked him. The next morning, Beatrice spoke to her sisters. "There is no free bread in this house." She pointed toward the heavy oak barrels and iron vats in the courtyard. "Sisters, these barrels must be maintained to keep our winter stores and salted meats from spoiling. The rain and wind have splashed muddy water all over them. Take these coarse linen cloths and scrub the wood and iron until they shine." Beatrice's voice was firm. "If you refuse, you may leave." Left with no choice, the sisters took up the coarse cloths. At first, they wept as they scrubbed the heavy oak and iron. They lamented their wretched fate, unable to believe that women who once wore the finest velvet and silk were now doing the work of low-born peasants. But as they sweated and scraped away the dried mud, something began to dawn on them. The lavish gowns they had prized so dearly had rotted away in the damp. But these rough, humble vats only grew brighter and more valuable the harder they worked. Eleanor wiped her tears with a soiled sleeve and said, "Beatrice, we were wrong. Your words were true all along." Isabella nodded in agreement. "We were beautiful on the outside, but our insides were completely hollow. As the sisters scrubbed the grime away, they also scrubbed away the vanity and arrogance that had plagued their hearts." At sunset, the three sisters sat side by side next to the gleaming rows of preserved food. Beatrice held her sister's blistered hands. "We can start anew from here." For the first time, the sisters became a true family. It was a rainy night. Edward sat alone in his study chamber, drinking a cup of dark ale and letting out a heavy sigh. Just then, Beatrice carefully opened the heavy oaken door and stepped inside. "My lord, you are not yet asleep." Edward looked at Beatrice. Perhaps it was the ale warming his blood, but words he had never dared to speak finally spilled from his lips. "I am a foolish man, a failure who could not secure a royal appointment or clerical advancement." Beatrice sat beside Edward and took his hand. "My lord, you are not a failure. You are merely waiting for your rightful time. Just as barley must ferment in the dark to become rich ale, your current pain and trials will mature into a deep, lasting wisdom." Edward gazed at Beatrice. Illuminated by the flickering candlelight, his wife's face looked warmer and more beautiful than ever before. "My lady, I was far too late in recognizing your true worth." Edward's eyes grew red with tears. "Forgive me for only looking at the surface and failing to see the brilliant soul beneath. To me, you are fairer than the most legendary queens of old." Tears welled up in Beatrice's eyes as well. Edward pulled Beatrice into a tight embrace, and she rested her head against his chest. The candle flame danced, casting their shadows as one upon the stone wall. For the first time, Edward wept aloud. They were tears born of the bitter sting of his past academic failures, the deep shame of having misjudged his own wife, and the overwhelming relief of finally finding a true partner in life. Beatrice patted her husband's back, shedding her own tears of joy. The night deepened. The sound of rain drummed against the thatched roof, and their silhouettes merged perfectly against the heavy tapestries. Moonlight seeped through the narrow window, casting a gentle silver glow across the chamber. That night, they truly became husband and wife. A fortnight passed after the great flood receded. A terrible plague began to sweep through the medieval village. The peasants barred their doors and refused to step outside. A state of emergency struck the merchant guild as well. Lady Margaret was suddenly seized by a violent fever and collapsed upon the stone floor. The manor servants, terrified of the contagion, fled into the countryside. But Beatrice walked straight into her mother-in-law's bedchamber. Lady Margaret was huddled under heavy wool blankets, her body trembling violently. With her God-given sight, Beatrice could almost see a dark, fiery heat radiating from the older woman's frail form. "Mother, I am here," Beatrice said softly. She dipped a clean linen cloth into a basin of cold water and gently wiped Lady Margaret's burning brow. Edward stood anxiously outside the heavy wooden door.
"My lady, you might catch the sickness yourself." Beatrice shook her head.
"My lord, do not fear. I must save my mother-in-law." Beatrice stayed by Lady Margaret's bedside day and night. She brewed a special broth of oats, mixing in rare fever-reducing herbs from the monastery and golden, restorative roots. Her innate gift for understanding the natural world shone brightly as she carefully selected the right remedies. Spoonful by spoonful, Beatrice fed the warm, healing broth to her mother-in-law. "Mother, you must wake up soon so you can scold me properly," Beatrice murmured, her voice filled with gentle warmth. "Without your strict commands, the manor feels far too quiet." After several sleepless nights, Lady Margaret finally opened her eyes. Through her blurred vision, she saw the face of her daughter-in-law, still gently wiping her brow. In that moment, Beatrice's plain, buck-toothed face looked as radiant and merciful as a holy saint from the grand cathedral windows. Lady Margaret reached out with a trembling hand and grasped Beatrice's fingers. "Child, I am so sorry." Lady Margaret's voice shook weakly. Tears streamed down Beatrice's cheeks. Lady Margaret reached deep beneath her pillow and pulled out a hidden leather pouch filled with silver coins, handing it to Beatrice. "Take this. Use it to feed the starving peasants. That is my true wish." It was a moment of profound reconciliation between them. Mistress of the house and her daughter-in-law, Beatrice held her mother-in-law's hand tightly. "Thank you, Mother." Standing outside the door, Edward watched the scene, his eyes brimming with grateful tears. A few days later, word of a charity feast spread through the muddy market square outside the guild. Edward rolled up the sleeves of his fine tunic and stepped forward. "If you brew the soup, my lady, I shall serve it," he declared. Husband and wife joined forces to aid the poor peasants suffering from the plague and winter famine. Massive iron cauldrons were hung over roaring hearths. Fires in the manor courtyard. The starving, plague-weary commoners gathered. Like a great flock, their lines stretching all the way down the cobblestone lanes to the edge of the village. Beatrice stood stirring a thick, hearty soup made of barley, root vegetables, and fever-breaking herbs.
"This broth will ease your sickness and fill your bellies," she told them kindly. "Please, take a bowl." However, they were terribly short on helping hands. The line grew so long that people were on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion. Seeing this, Edward tucked his scholarly robes into his belt and marched straight toward the roaring fires. A remaining servant gasped and ran up to him. "My lord, how can a noble parish scholar wield a wooden soup ladle?" "It is beneath your station." Edward snatched the wooden ladle from the servants. Hands with a stern expression. "My wife is sweating before the open flames to save these people. How can a husband stand idly by with his hands behind his back?" Edward began ladling the hot soup from the iron cauldrons, serving it to the desperate crowd. Sweat poured down his face, but he did not stop for a single moment. Beatrice moved among the sick, checking their ailments and working in perfect harmony with her husband. Beatrice used her linen sleeve to wipe the sweat from Edward's brow. Edward looked at Beatrice and flashed a bright, joyous smile. There was no longer any trace of insecurity or awkwardness in his expression. An elderly beggar, clutching his wooden bowl, wept openly. "The healing lady is saving our lives," he cried. Others quickly joined in. "And the ladle scholar is serving us with his own hands. They are truly sent by God." The villagers began calling Beatrice the healing lady for the miraculous soup she brewed, and they affectionately named Edward the ladle scholar for casting aside his noble pride to serve the poor. Edward found that he was far prouder to be known as the ladle scholar who fed the hungry than as a high and mighty academic. He shrugged his shoulders and smiled at Beatrice. "My lady, I feel as though I have finally become a useful man." Beatrice laughed softly. "My lord, you were a useful man from the very beginning." The husband and wife handed out soup until the sun dipped below the horizon. Words of deep gratitude echoed endlessly through the courtyard, and the tales of the healing lady and the ladle scholar spread throughout the entire medieval village and beyond. Several days after the great charity feast had concluded, Master William took to his bed. The many long years of leading the vast merchant guild had finally taken their toll, and his great strength gave out. That was the exact moment Richard made his move. He filed a formal grievance with the local magistrate's court. He falsely accused Master William's guild of keeping forged parchment ledgers, to steal the king's taxes, and of selling rotten provisions to the people. The sheriff's deputy stormed into the guild's courtyard. The merchant house was forcibly shuttered, and all the ledgers were seized by the crown's authority. The manor was thrown into absolute chaos. Eleanor and Isabella, pale as ghosts, came sprinting toward Beatrice. "Beatrice! Those ledgers the sheriff's men just confiscated!" Eleanor gasped for breath. "We saw John, Richard's loyal lackey, sneak in through the rear postern gate and swap the books!" Isabella nodded frantically. The ink he carried was hastily mixed, lacking the aged iron gall standard of our trade. Beatrice's eyes grew sharp. "Sisters, are you absolutely certain?" "We are certain," Eleanor replied. "When we scrubbed the barrels and vats, we learned to spot every detail of the guild's proper materials that never failed us." The next morning,
Beatrice and Edward were dragged before the sheriff's court.
The sheriff threw the thick ledger onto his wooden table and demanded,
"Is this the ledger of your guild?" Kneeling on the cold stone floor, Beatrice leaned forward and smelled the parchment.
"My lord sheriff, this ledger is a forgery." Beatrice's voice rang out with absolute conviction. "Our guild uses aged iron gall ink for our records, but this book reeks of the sharp,
Bitter scent of freshly mixed soot ink. More importantly, Edward noted, the pages are bound with cheap linen twine, not the wax-sealed leather threads, exclusive to our guild scribe." The sheriff hesitated, furrowing his brow. At that moment, Edward stepped forward. "If you examine how poorly the soot ink has settled into the parchment, you will see whether these are 10 years of records or hasty scribbles made just last night." Edward took up a quill and methodically pointed out every logical error in the false ledger. "This book lists exotic goods our guild has never traded in. Furthermore, if you read the numbers closely, they reveal evidence of Richard secretly hoarding wealth for himself." Taking the clues Beatrice had discovered, through her sharp senses, Edward used his scholarly logic to build an ironclad case. The sheriff ordered his bailiff to submerge a page of the ledger in a basin of water. Instantly, the freshly applied ink bled and washed away. "This ledger is indeed a forgery," the sheriff declared. Richard was immediately stripped of his position and thrown into the castle dungeon. Beatrice ran to her sisters and grasped their hands. "Sisters, thank you." Eleanor and Isabella smiled sheepishly. "We had to earn our keep somehow," they said. For the first time, the sisters felt the deep, burning warmth of true family love. With Richard's treachery brought to light and the villain locked away, peace finally returned to the Merchant Guild. However, the heavy toll of the ordeal proved too much for Master William. His health rapidly declined. The grand bedchamber grew heavy with the scent of bitter herbal remedies, and the bedside candles burned low, casting long, flickering shadows against the cold stone walls. Master William knew in his heart that his time on this earth was drawing to a close. He commanded that his family be brought to his side. Beatrice, Edward, and Lady Margaret gathered closely around his heavy oak bed. Master William's breath was shallow and ragged, yet his eyes gleamed with a piercing, unbroken light. From beneath his woolen blankets, he drew forth an old, worn leather pouch. With trembling hands, he opened it to reveal a heavy bronze signet ring and the iron key to the guild's main vault. These were the very tools he had used his entire life to seal ledgers and guard the family's wealth. Master William took Beatrice's calloused hand and placed the heavy bronze signet ring firmly into her palm. "My dear child," Master William's voice trembled, "frail but resolute. All my life, I have used this ring to mark truth from thousands of lies. But my mortal strength has grown dim. You, however, have the true weight of a master's heart." Tears began to stream down Beatrice's cheeks. "I give this ring to you as a token, a proof that you have been the true anchor of this guild." Master William then slowly turned his gaze to his son, Edward. He handed him the iron key and his most cherished silver-tipped quill.
The legal title of Guildmaster falls to you, Edward, as is the law of the realm.
But I command you to entrust the absolute control of our trade to Beatrice.
Let her be the true mistress of our commerce.
Do not ever feel ashamed of your wife. Standing upon the sturdy ship she builds,
You must sail freely into your scholarly pursuits.
that is your true path. Edward bowed his head deep, weeping openly. The very next morning, the entire household of clerks, stewards, and servants was assembled in the great hall. Honoring his father's dying wish, Edward stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Before Beatrice, Edward guided Beatrice to stand by the high-backed oaken chair at the head of the hall and stood firmly by her side. "Hear me, all of you!" Edward's voice rang clear across the hall. "By my father's decree, while I hold the title in law, the absolute mistress of our trade is my wife, Beatrice. Let no man or woman dare defy her orders in matters of our commerce."
From his bedchamber, Master William heard the echoes of his son's declaration.
He smiled warmly, picturing his son and daughter-in-law standing shoulder to shoulder, relying on one another. "It is done," he murmured.
With a smile of profound relief, he closed his eyes and slipped peacefully into
the Lord's embrace. Within the manor, there was no loud wailing, only the heavy, solemn weight of stifled tears and fierce resolve. A single hot tear fell upon the bronze signet ring Beatrice held tightly in her hands. 3 long winters passed since Master William was laid to rest in the abbey courtyard. Lady Margaret, having lost her lifelong companion, eventually took to her bed, her strength fading. Her only remaining earthly wish was to see her son. Appointed as a royal official, the day finally arrived for Edward to travel to the royal capital to present his treatise to the king's council. As he prepared to mount his horse, Beatrice gently straightened the collar of his fine wool cloak. "My dear husband," she said softly, "you need only show them the wisdom that already dwells within you." Edward took her hands, pressing them warmly. "I have come this far solely because of you, my wife. I shall do my absolute best." The presentation commenced in the grand hall of the royal castle. Edward submitted a comprehensive charter on fundamental methods to save the starving commoners from winter famine, while the other noble scholars frantically quoted ancient philosophers and complex Latin texts. Edward calmly read from his parchment. As he spoke, the words Beatrice had shared over the years by the roaring hearth, in the muddy market square, in the bustling kitchens, flowed through his speech like a beacon of light. Edward argued, comparing the governance of the realm to the careful brewing of ale and the baking of daily bread. Ruling a kingdom is much like tending to the hearth and the harvest, he proclaimed. The foul mold of corruption must be boldly scraped away. The salt of the law must be balanced, neither too harsh nor too weak. But above all, just as dough needs time to rise before it can feed a family, a ruler must have the patience to wait for the commoners, ensuring no one starves while the harvest grows. At the very end of his presentation, Edward added one final sentence. All of these truths,
This humble servant learned from the kitchen of my wife, Beatrice. When the king read the submissions, he struck the wooden table in awe. "This is no empty babble from a man locked in a parish library. This is a masterpiece steeped in the true sweat of life." Edward was awarded the highest honor, appointed as a royal official of the court. Wearing a grand crest and carrying the royal seal, Edward rode back into his village to the sound of cheering crowds. Though a grand feast was being prepared in the market square, Edward rode straight to the manor hall and rushed to his mother's bedchamber. Lady Margaret offered a faint, fragile smile from her pillows. Edward knelt on one knee before his mother and Beatrice, bowing his head respectfully and pressing their hands to his lips. "Mother, I have done it," he said. Lady Margaret reached out with trembling fingers to touch the crest. Edward then looked up at Beatrice and spoke with a voice full of emotion. "My dear wife, these honors do not belong to me. They are the blossoms grown from your wisdom." Lady Margaret weakly reached out and grasped her daughter-in-law's hand. "Thank you, thank you," she whispered. With those final heartfelt words, Lady Margaret closed her eyes and found eternal peace. After the mourning period ended, life flowed onward like a steady river. Under Beatrice's brilliant command, the Merchant Guild rose to become the greatest and wealthiest in all the realm. Edward, serving the crown, enacted just laws for the commoners and rose high in the royal court. Most importantly, the deep love between Edward and Beatrice bore beautiful fruit. They were blessed with a sturdy eldest son, Henry, who took after his father with a deep love for books and justice. Soon after, they welcomed a sharp-witted second daughter, Alice, who inherited her mother's quick mind and bold spirit. Whenever Edward returned from the castle road, Henry's voice reciting scholarly texts and the clacking of Alice's counting, bored would greet him. Edward and Beatrice would hold their children close, their hearts full. The manor hall was forever filled with the warm echoes of laughter. Decades passed. It was a crisp, sunlit afternoon in late autumn at the grand manor estate. The courtyard was alive with the joyful shouts of grandchildren playing by the old stone well. Edward and Beatrice, now with hair as white as winter snow, sat side by side on the wooden porch. Their grown children had come to pay their respects. Henry was now in his mid-40s. Taking after his father, he had become a righteous royal official, widely praised by the people for his unwavering justice. Alice was in her early 40s. Mirroring Beatrice, she had grown into a shrewd and magnanimous merchant, managing the guild and leading the family's enterprise to even greater heights. Looking proudly at his children, Edward smiled. One has become the pillar of the realm, and the other the cornerstone of our family. My dear wife, of all the harvests we have reaped in this life, our children are truly the most bountiful. After the children took their leave, Edward gently took up a fine wooden comb. With tender care, he brushed out Beatrice's silver hair, smoothing sweet-smelling rose oil into the strands. Beatrice looked at her reflection in a polished bronze mirror and let out a wistful chuckle. "My lord, just look at my face. It is a map of deep wrinkles. And these buck teeth of mine refuse to retreat, even in my old age. I am truly a plain, unsightly old woman. Edward stopped combing. He met Beatrice's eyes in the mirror, took her wrinkled hand, and pressed it gently against his own cheek. "My lady, what nonsense are you speaking?" His voice was as warm as the hearth fire. To my eyes, those teeth are the most precious, grand gates in all the world. Beatrice tilted her head in confusion. Grand gates? Edward turned her gently to face him. Indeed, those grand gates opened wide to let profound fortune into my life. And through them, your endless wisdom flowed out, saving our entire household. Edward pointed toward the sunlit courtyard. "Look at those children playing in the yard. They are the beautiful flowers that bloomed because you ensured they would. Never know the harsh bite of winter famine. To me, you are the rarest pearl that protected our family." Beatrice blushed, offering a shy smile. "Oh, my lord, you flatter me too much." As she beamed, her buck teeth caught the golden autumn light. Finding her utterly endearing, Edward wrapped his arms securely around his wife's shoulders. The old couple sat in the warm sunlight, a picture of absolute peace. In the courtyard, their grandchildren ran freely, watched over by their strong, capable son and daughter. The estate was as beautiful as a master's painting. Spring blossoms may be dazzling to the eye, but they rarely survive the summer heat. Yet a humble loaf of dark bread and a hearty stew, though plain to look at, provide the strength to endure a lifetime. A person's outward appearance will inevitably weather and fade with the passing seasons, but the harvest sown by a kind, steadfast heart remains forever. The lives of Beatrice and Edward stand as a testament that true, enduring beauty lies not on the surface, but deep within the soul. How did you enjoy the tale of Beatrice and Edward? In a world that often only seeks out faces as pretty as wildflowers, her father-in-law, Master William, saw things differently. He read pure dedication in Beatrice's rough, calloused hands, and felt the warmth of her spirit in a simple cup of salted water. We, too, may sometimes find ourselves misunderstood or judged by our outward guise. But if we, like Beatrice, quietly and steadfastly do our absolute best, the day will surely come when someone recognizes our true, hidden worth. True beauty is never found on the outside. It resides within. We will return next time with another heartwarming tale from the old villages. If you wish to hear more stories from our tavern by the fire, please remember to like and subscribe.